Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we are going to talk about the Just Add Ice orchid. Yep, they're here. As a viewer said, it was just a matter of time until Just Add Ice reached my tiny little island at the edge of the European Union. Because look at this, I found 3 really beautiful mini Phalaenopsis at the flower shop today, but shocked and awed was I when I saw the tag. And well, I thought it would be a good opportunity to make a video and talk a little bit about, because the reality is that many people actually purchase these orchids. And I get a lot of comments and questions from viewers about these orchids. So today I will actually do a serious and informative video out of this. But in case you're new to the hobby and to my channel, I will start off by saying that the more serious or more passionate orchid growers are not fond of this brand at all. I'm not fond of it either, for reasons which we will discuss today. But as I was saying, many people purchase these orchids. We're gonna talk about their care. Is it different than any other Phalaenopsis? And of course, we're gonna insist on watering. So with that said, let's start. I know that many people believe that these are some sort of very special orchids, which gives them some supernatural abilities, such as being watered with ice and being okay with it. So are these special hybrids, are they different than other miniature Phalaenopsis? My opinion is that they are not, and I base my opinion on what I found through research. If you check my older video, you'll see that back then at least, Just Add Ice was actually purchasing normal Phalaenopsis from a different nursery, which would grow them or import them themselves. So based on my findings, there is no reason for me to believe that these orchids have been especially created to withstand ice. I don't even see how that would be possible, because the ancestors of these orchids, the original species, don't naturally grow in areas which experience freezing conditions, snow, ice, freezing water, and things of the sorts. So there is no ancestor there passing on the gene of being freezing condition tolerant. So why do we refer to them as the Just Add Ice orchid? Simple, good branding. And I have to give it to this company. They did a fantastic job positioning themselves on the market and standing out in the crowd. Many people across the world know who Just Add Ice is. I don't have to have these orchids available in my flower shops to know about this company. But it is my opinion that these are nothing more than typical, usual mini Phalaenopsis hybrids. So far, really, there is no problem. There's nothing illegal here. It's perfectly fine for a company to purchase products manufactured by a different company, brand them, and sell them on. There are many companies who do that. The problem comes when part of your branding and marketing campaign is to give, how should I put this, questionable user manuals. If it wasn't obvious until now, and if you don't know this brand, well, their whole deal is that it's so easy to care for these orchids, particularly water them, that you can actually use ice cubes. Just get a cube, put it on the pot, and you're set to go. Set it and forget it, as they say. And well, that's kind of questionable. The more you are in the hobby, the more you research the actual species that went into creating these hybrids that we know and love today, the more you realize that Phalaenopsis orchids don't naturally experience freezing condition in nature, certainly not the most used species in today's hybrids. And this translates into a lack of adaptation to these freezing conditions. And by this, I don't only mean freezing temperatures, but freezing water as well. So low temperatures generally do have the potential to damage a Phalaenopsis orchid, since it doesn't know how to protect itself from the cold weather like other plants can, such as deciduous trees or dormant bulbs. Phalaenopsis orchids do not go dormant, they never lose their leaves, and although people say they go into this rest mode, dormant mode, whatever, it really isn't what you think it is. I personally like to stay away from that word because it implies a sort of dormancy, and sadly, Just Add Ice sometimes refers to dormancy or rest periods with Phalaenopsis, but the truth is, they are constantly doing something. When flowers fall, new leaves grow, roots grow pretty much at all times in normal conditions. There is actually no trait in a Phalaenopsis growth pattern that suggests it will take a dormancy or it will protect itself from colder temperatures. If you've already researched Phalaenopsis orchids, you know that the trick to reblooming them is to lower temperatures. But this lowering of temperature is very, 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 very slight. All we need to do is bring the temperature to 17, 18 degrees Celsius. You'll have the equivalent to Fahrenheit, which some of us might even consider pretty toasty, depending on your warmth tolerance. So the temperature needed to initiate flower spikes is nowhere near freezing conditions. It's not even cold, it's intermediate warm, to be fully honest. But being that vegetative growth for this orchid is in warm temperatures, over 22 degrees Celsius, lowering with only a few degrees the temperature lets this orchid know about the passing of seasons. This temperature drop is not meant to shock the orchid, is not big enough to shock the orchid. It is just something that mimics the passing of seasons, pretty much like these orchids would naturally encounter. They don't encounter snow or heavy winters, but they do have a variation of temperature when seasons change. But definitely, it is nowhere near freezing conditions. So now I'm gonna start to refer to comments that I got throughout the years. One of the things that can happen if we are placing ice or very, very cold water on the roots is root damage. The actual tissue, this velamen, can get damaged by the very low temperature and visually it will look like darkened patches. Now, placing the cube off the roots and on the medium doesn't actually help either, because that water will just start to melt and it's going to seep into the medium where it's going to run into other roots, and it has the potential to damage other roots within the medium. Now, you might say that if the cube melts, that water is not freezing cold anymore. Well, depends what you mean by freezing cold. Yes, it's not ice, it's not frozen anymore, but it's not 25 degrees Celsius either. It could be 3, 4, 5 degrees Celsius, which is warm enough to melt, but still very cold for the roots of a Phalaenopsis. And the damage can appear sooner or later. Sometimes the damage can appear immediately, sometimes in time after repeated exposure to that very, very low temperature. Your own climate will help as well. If it's rather warm, maybe things will not be so bad, at least at first. But it is my personal belief that sooner or later we're gonna start to see some issues. So the actual temperature of the water is one of the issues, I think the main issue with this technique, but there are others. So one thing that we see on the tag is that we can use 1 to 3 ice cubes. Let's say 1 ice cube for a mini phal, 3 for a bigger standard one. What if my cubes are not equal to the ones that other people use? Because ice cube trays differ. For all of us, the size of these cubes will be totally different. How does this matter? Well, it does, because depending on the size of the cube, we will add more or less water. How much is too much? How much is too little? Because that water will have to go somewhere once it's not frozen anymore. And typically it goes inside the pot and remains in the decorative container or the dish. Now, one thing that I'm seeing these orchids being potted in is this type of pot, which, can you see, has a little bit of a rim there, which holds the orchid up and the water can actually collect here. Well, how many times do we need to water our orchid with ice cubes until that little reservoir is full? Because yes, water can evaporate, but this is nowhere near helping evaporation. It is a reservoir which doesn't actually have direct contact with the moving air. It's right here at the bottom of the pot, so in time it will collect. Do we need to throw that water away? What do we do with it? And keep in mind, this is disconsidering the whole temperature of the water situation. Also, what if the orchid is not potted in this style of pot? Does it mean the orchid sits in water? Well, yes, it does. Is that healthy? Sometimes it might not be. So controlling the quantity of water with orchids can be done. And I'm not gonna go into the details. It has to do with the setup, with the materials used. But most of the times these orchids come in all sorts of bark mixes. As we can see, this one is a plug directly, so not the most wicking of materials, which means that all of that water will just pool at the bottom and keep those roots soggy at the bottom if we don't discard the water ourselves. So at this point, I do have a bit of a dilemma. What is easier, to put ice cubes and be careful that this water is dumped out, or just run water through the pot, drain it, and put it back? I don't know what the point of the ice cube is when we have to make sure that that water is removed periodically, or after every cube or after every 2 cubes, depending on the size of the cube, right? Also, where do we actually place the ice cube? Well, in their tutorials, I've actually seen quite a few methods. We can put them directly on the roots, and as we discussed, it might not be a good idea. We can put it on the medium, so not in contact with the roots, but as we discussed, that water will seep in and will reach the roots inside the medium. And worst of all, I did see in one of their tutorials the ice cube being put directly on top of the orchid, which is the biggest no-no ever. Because that water, not only is it very cold and has the potential to damage even leaves and tissue in general, but also it will pull in the crown and in between the leaves. And that is one of the major no-nos of the orchid growing hobby. Water left pooling in the crowns and in the leaves can actually lead to crown rot or stem rot because it can accumulate pathogens which will start to affect the leaves. But isn't this the equivalent of rain? No, it's not. 1, rain is not freezing cold. 2, these orchids don't grow like this in nature. They're certainly not potted, but being that they're epiphytic, meaning they grow above the soil, they grow on trees, trunks, branches, things of the sorts, their position is certainly not upright like this, but rather like this. And in this example, you can see that my orchid already is starting to grow as it would naturally grow, meaning leaning, and with its leaves pointing downwards. This shape of the leaves and way of growing makes sure that water doesn't actually accumulate and pool in the crown and leaf joints. It actually is washed away. Also, our living rooms and offices are not nearly as ventilated as a natural habitat would be. We don't have winds, we don't have constant refreshed air, and all of these things do not help us with water evaporation or with making sure we don't have a buildup of pathogens which can potentially damage orchids. So these have been issues and questions addressed in the comment section actually. All sorts of patches starting to appear on the roots starting to just become mushy. What to do with the water that pools at the bottom of the pot? Why is my orchid suddenly losing all of its leaves? Why is my orchid all limpy and has leathery leaves? All of these ailments could be traced down to this watering with ice technique. It is definitely not the only way in which you can obtain crown rot, stem rot, root rot, all of these things. But with each case, I had to take into account the context, what the grower was doing, how he was going about things. Obviously, if he never showered the orchid, but he put ice on top of the crown, well, the reason for his crown rot was not showering the orchid, it was the ice. And if the grower made sure that the water from which he obtained the ice was not hard water, and they didn't even fertilize their orchid just yet to have salt accumulation on the roots, well, the reason for the patches most likely was caused by the ice, not the hard water or the high salt content. So making a statistics, when it comes to this topic, I actually got more of the bad experiences rather than the good ones. But I did also get comments saying that if the company says you should use ice, then why would they lie? You should use ice. Or my orchid has been watered with ice for I don't know how much time and it's perfectly fine. So obviously the experiences will vary because it depends on many factors. Time is obviously one of the factors. Things actually happen in time, environment, and things of the sorts. They do play a role as well, but overall I would say that I had to deal with more negative outcomes than good outcomes. And here is where our problem comes with this company. Rather than addressing these situations that are actually happening to their customers, they tend to brush it a little bit. They tend to create a sort of a different scenario for why your orchid might look limpy, why the leaves might fall, why the leaves might be wrinkly. At least a few years ago on their website, they did have answers stating that the orchid is perfectly fine, it's just going through its dormancy, continue to water it, when the orchid was super dehydrated and had no roots, you know. So as a passionate orchid grower, I can see how many people were really not happy with these responses, with this technique, which is very risky at the end of the day, when it would be just so much easier to create a different story to your company. You can keep the name Just Add Ice, but show us a beverage with ice in it, not an orchid with ice on it. It's so easy to turn around the situation into something more educational, more informative, because at the end of the day, your customers are paying customers. This is not a product that goes off the shelves for free. We are paying money for these orchids, and the instructions need to work with us, not against us. Now, of course, this is all my personal opinion, and our orchid community has various different opinions on the subject. Of course, maybe the company will think that they're doing nothing wrong and that watering with ice is absolutely safe, and you will also find people who believe that watering with ice is safe. But it is my experience as a YouTuber, as a person who reads a lot of comments, that things are not really turning out all that great if you do follow this ice thing. And because some of you asked on my Facebook page and in my community section if I will make an experiment watering an orchid with ice and see what happens, I will not, because I'm extremely uncomfortable with doing that, since I already know from the beginning that the risk is very, very high. It's perfectly fine if you want to test it out, and I think there is a video or an article or something of the sorts that does test out the whole ice situation. Feel free to Google it. I personally will never make this experiment because it makes me feel very, very uncomfortable. And if you know my channel, you know that I don't shy away from experiments, experimenting with setups, with procedures, with boosters, fertilizers, and things of the sorts. But there are a few things that I just don't want to do on my channel. And these things typically revolve around damaging my orchid. So I will never put an orchid through such extremes just to test out its tolerance. Remember a while back I was telling you about this experiment in which an orchid was left without water for a month or maybe more than that until leaves started to fall? I'm not that person. I will never do that experiment. Same with ice. I know that it's gonna damage the orchid, and I don't want to put my orchids through that just to prove a point. Also, setups. I go through a lot of setups, and I know that some people that I used to know are quite irked by that. But in the end, it doesn't really matter, because I don't change setups because I want to damage the orchid and because I know it will damage an orchid, but because I want to improve the life of my orchid and also my life. I want my hobby to be easier with orchids and also help others make their life a little easier as well. But I think you already know my 3 rules for setups and media. So if a setup doesn't give me enough water or enough air, or it's just damaging for the roots, it's out of the question. I'm not gonna do it. You might have observed there are some setups that I don't even touch and I will never touch because they just don't follow my rules. And this doesn't necessarily mean that I'm right. It just means it's not for me. And it's perfectly fine if other people want to test it out. It's all personal preference circle. My personal sadness with this company is that it still applies the same tricks that worked 10 years ago. Yes, 10 years ago, orchids were not as popular as they are today. We didn't have as much free information on the internet available to us as we do today. I alone have 2,000 videos on orchids, but I'm not the only orchid creator. These tactics are not needed anymore. We all know that orchids can be super easy to take care of. And there are companies who provide good products that help us in our hobby. So these tactics are not needed anymore Just Add Ice. And I promise you that if you change them, if you start to move those ice cubes in the cocktails and leave the room temperature water to the orchids, I will be the first one to applaud you and to acknowledge you on my channel and to say, hey, you know what? I applaud the change. I will not hold a grudge forever, I promise. Because at the end of the day, really, it's about the customers, and the customers do pay for these orchids with their hard-earned money. It is my opinion that these techniques are very outdated. They're unnecessary nowadays. We have so many resources to help us with orchid growing. We don't need these orchids to be even easier to sell. They're already easy to sell. I think I'm doing my part with my YouTube channel. I think sales of orchids have grown because of my YouTube channel. So there are so many ways in which we can sell orchids. It's so much easier today. We don't need to put ice on them. It is just my opinion. And of course, you guys are free to share with us your opinions down below. As I was saying, I think the best approach is to support change in this instance. If you feel like the company should change, then support the change. Don't necessarily boycott the company, or at least this is what I believe, because the orchids they're not to blame. They're just normal orchids. They have no fault for existing, you know? They deserve to be with somebody who cares for them and loves them. It's not their fault that they have a tag on them that shows ice, you know? That's what I would like to see from this company. Change. I think change should be welcome. I think change is good. Now with that said, that has been it on Just Add Ice. And hopefully it will be the last time we talk about them and about watering orchids with ice. Fingers crossed. Maybe next time we talk about them, we're gonna talk about rebranding. Who knows? One can hope, right? And with that said, it is time to end. Hopefully you've enjoyed today's video. You know the drill, like or dislike below, subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, tutorials, discussions, repottings, all sorts of orchid related subjects. Visit my second channel for more plant videos. And also follow me on my Instagram and Facebook. It's always nice to keep in touch there as well. And with that said, I'll see you next time. Bye. Maya, say bye. Maya, say bye. Say bye. Look at me. Hello. She cannot be bothered. Bye.